God's big idea is to colonize earth with the culture of heaven.
Wow.
That's God's big idea.
Let me jump in there. Especially in countries where there is a philosophy, a creed, spoken and unspoken, that there needs to be a quote-unquote separation of church and state, where people are actually petrified of the church getting involved in things other than ecclesiastical matters. How does that fit into what you just said?
I'm not talking about the church. This idea of separation of church and state is not even a concept in the mind of Jesus. If you study his message was the introduction of a state to planet Earth. He calls himself a king, not a prophet. He calls his message a kingdom, not a religion. He calls his purpose the will of God on earth, not the imposition of people's ideas on other people.
And for viewers who might be raising eyebrows right now about what you just said, the fact is, if we look at Scripture, the New Testament, the word Christian is only mentioned a few times.
3 times.
But the word kingdom
profusely
is replete.
The purpose of the story of the Bible is about a king extending his kingdom to a distant territory that he created called earth.
And he can only do that through you and I, and more so through those who understand what their purpose is on this side of eternity.
Well, I think when you talk about purpose in this regard, it's a bigger picture than your private purpose. And what we've been doing for the past 2,000 years is we've been bogged down in details and haven't gotten the big picture. God's big idea is a simple idea. All kingdoms have this idea that if you expand your territory to a foreign territory, that is called colonization. The Romans were the first ones to actually effectively implement God's prototype of colonization. That is why Christ didn't come to earth until the Roman Empire was in power. You know, from Genesis chapter 3, when God made the promise that the seed would come, all the way to Matthew chapter 1, is 4,000 years. What was God waiting for? How come Christ didn't come during the time of the Babylonians, or the Chaldeans, or the Byzantines? When those kingdoms invaded territory, do you know what they all did? They would take the people, burn the villages, and uproot the people and take them back to their countries and make them slaves.
Sure.
That's how Daniel and Shadrach and those guys were held in Babylon. That was the system of war. You go, you invade a country, you uproot the people, bring them back, and you make them slaves. And you just leave the land desolate. The Roman Empire was the first empire to change that. The Romans would invade territory, leave the people in the territory, but they would send, first of all, a governor from the castle, from the very inner courts of the king, the Caesar, to live in that foreign territory. If you study the first chapter of Genesis, it said the earth was without form and void. That means that there was no order, no purpose to the planet. Now, the first person to move,
the Spirit of God.
I rest my case. So now God's going to bring order and culture to the planet. He sends the governor first. Then he sends the citizens. He made Adam, and Adam had everybody in his loins. So now God has the governor and the citizens in the territory. His command to Adam was, have dominion over the earth. It means let the culture of heaven be the dominant culture on earth. When Jesus came to earth, he came in the middle of a colonial environment. So his words would make sense when he spoke. And that's why Pilate was very impressed with Jesus, more than the Pharisees were and the Sadducees were, because Jesus understood colonialism much more than the religious leaders. When Pilate asked him, are you a king? He was saying, wait a minute, you're here to colonize, aren't you? Christ says, you are correct. I am a king. For this purpose was I born. Then he says, when Pilate threatened him, Pilate says, do you know I have the power from my king to take your life or give it to you? And Jesus says, wait a minute, I got power too. He said, you could have no power over me unless it was first given to you by my government in heaven. For even now I could call 10 legions of my soldiers from my country, to come and deliver me out of your hands. In other words, Christ was telling Pilate, look, I didn't come to destroy Rome. I came to invade Rome as an infiltration like yeast. Colonization is not the invasion. Colonization is the infiltration. When the Europeans came to these islands, they didn't colonize us with weapons. This is very important. You don't colonize people with force. Colonization takes place just like yeast. They came, they told us, okay, you will speak English. We had African languages here years ago. We're from Africa. They said, no, you speak English. We teach you English. Then they taught us their history and didn't teach us ours. So we took on their history. And then they taught us their values. No weapons of warfare. Colonization takes place by infiltration, integration. It takes place by impact, influence. That's what yeast does to dough.